Thank you. So today I'm going to be transitioning away from kind of the how cities are constructed to looking more at the agents and the people that are within them and how did they use cities as a space? How did they move within them? What are the dynamics and what are some of the questions we should be asking about them? So to begin with, when you think about a city, it's constructed of street networks. And within antiquity, this was full of various types of street mobility, social interactions that occurred within these spaces. But despite knowing that we can go to an ancient city, we can see these spaces, we know that they occurred there, we don't actually know that much about them, and we haven't studied much because oftentimes they don't leave physical footprints within the archaeological record. So in many regards, this makes it very difficult to even determine what should I be asking, what should I be questioning about these various urban mobility interactions that happen on the urban scale. And when we look at Roman mobility kind of research tradition, we see that a lot of studies will focus on extant evidence of mobility. So you get examples like at Pompeii with street ruts and wear and determining where might have carts have traveled, where did pedestrians possibly move within the city. But that doesn't tell us much. It tells us about a very specific type of mobility, but not how other people interacted with it and not necessarily specific actions that were occurring within the street space. We also get instances such as space syntax, where we can determine kind of the general mobility and movement patterns across the entire city, but we can't ask about how does one single person move from one shop to another shop, or are there kind of hubs of movement within the city associated with a specific activity? A lot of the issues when we're looking at the large urban scale and street networks is that you get a broad overview of movement, but it's hard to relate it to a specific activity or a specific group of people. Likewise, another analysis that I've been working with the past couple of years is urban network analysis. This builds upon space syntax a bit by questioning how do individual buildings within the built environment structure different movement patterns. But the trend with all of these different analyses is that we kind of leave out the people and the crowds that compose these various movement dynamics in the city. And we transition back to just looking at empty streets within the archaeological record, and we forget about the interactions that brought life to these urban contexts. When looking at trying to address this within kind of Greek-Roman approaches, we start to try to identify what do we know about crowds and kind of interactions within streets. So we can go to literary sources. Here I have an example from Juvenal satires, and you can see that they're talking a bit about the carts thundering down streets, about some of the traffic jams and the annoyances associated with that in the ancient city. Also about all of the people, and that if there's a procession or kind of economic transport going through the city, you might get run over if you happen to be standing in the wrong space. But this is hard to then transition and go back to the archaeological record. As a result, most of the research has either been trying to identify what does the literary record say, or what do kind of images show us, what type of carts were present, what were the different typologies of that. Can we identify any type of interactions within these? But this still is a very kind of detailed, focused aspect that doesn't then inform our understanding about the different dynamics that occurred within the streets. Likewise, we have a continuing kind of tradition, and especially the past couple of years, of questioning kind of the mobility in ancient street systems. So we just have some of the books that have come out the past few years talking about, say, processional movement or cart movement. What are the different types of interactions that might have occurred along a Roman street, even going as far as to what are the different senses, how did that promote mobility within Roman cities. But the issue is that all of these are written theories. most of these theories have not been transitioned into how can we apply this and study this within an ancient street network and with the archaeological evidence we have. And so that's where my current research is kind of situated, is how can we move away from this just general interest in mobility within ancient cities to studying it within very specific urban contexts. And what does that tell us about the interactions and the way in which cities were structured? And then how did people interact with, say, shops or with social spaces within the city? If we can help start to develop more detailed models, we can actually move away from saying, yes, this street was probably the most popular and that's where all the carts went down, to actually creating a model and saying, was this actually the main street? And if this was, what type of activities were occurring in relation to it? Vice versa. If actually all the movement transitioned to another part of the city, then what was this area of the city doing that we thought was the most important? So we can start to question our assumptions about kind of urban street networks, urban interactions by looking at this. And in order to do this, I'm looking at how can I actually simulate crowd movement within the ancient city using a NetLogo model. So I'm in the process of developing quite a few different movement algorithms to see how can we actually study various crowd movement dynamics through the city, through the ancient city. This is just a sample of part of Ostia street network. Here you have just the central forum of Ostia for those that are interested. It doesn't matter, I'm just looking at any street network at the moment to do this. And my main question is, if you have a leader that's going through a set route in the urban environment, what are the best procedures to get a group of people to follow it? And this is very much a base algorithms to try to, that you can then adapt and develop to ask other questions of movement in the city. But to begin with, I need to figure out what are the best movement dynamics that you can actually code into a model. So to begin, I've had the leader has a predefined route that you can see there. This is just created in GIS randomly. It has no ancient significance apart from I wanted to have the leader go down different width streets, deal with different kind of turns and angles, basically to test as you start adding in crowds of people, how do they deal with that? How many people will continue to follow the leader from the start to the end? Or how many people get lost, and try to see what way can we start to begin to simulate these dynamics in a way that is realistic. While this is being done in relation to the ancient street, movement dynamics from antiquity today did not change that much. There are only so many ways in which you can walk down a street and not run into other people or other carts. So we can use a lot of the modern principles and then apply it to models like this. And then we can start to question what things might have been different and do we need to tweak within the model. And so my question at the moment is, what's actually the best algorithm for simulating these crowds following this leader through the street network? So the first one is just a very simplistic model, and this is actually almost more to identify what problems do you have when coding these kind of movement dynamics within NetLogo in particular. And by identifying these problems, we can then determine how do we need to adapt the model within this actual ABM environment and also relate it to realistic movement dynamics. So here we can just see a simple model that the followers are basically coded to always try to face and move in the general direction of the leader. And you see that they pretty much do that, at least for these various time steps that you can see there. But then when I run it for the entire kind of fabricated route around the city, you can see that the processionals are following the leader for quite a while, but then a lot of them end up getting lost. So here we have a graphic, and this is just after one simulation run. It's a little light to see, but you can see that they follow it, but then it gets very light here. We lose a lot of agents. And it's a bit more visible after 20 different simulation runs. This highlights that, yes, quite a few of the agents do follow the leader. especially at the beginning, but then they kind of go off on their own, and you can see a lot of the different route variations. It also highlights where they're getting stuck within the model. So this is in part an issue with the patches within NetLogo, and if you're going on various diagonals, there's sometimes some difficulty. So this is highlighting actually some of the problems within the coding environment that you then need to be aware of. And it also shows that this specific movement algorithm doesn't work very well. By the end, I think I ran it with about 15 processional followers. At the end, I had about 3, and a few that joined in at the very end. But this shows that this algorithm might work very well on a small scale, maybe even in a building, but on a large urban scale, not as much. So recognizing that, the next approach I took was determining that we need to get away from just trying to see the processional leader and moving towards how can we encode the influence movement of, I want to go in that direction, but I know I want to go into that direction even if the leader becomes invisible. So a lot of the issues with the previous model is that as the leader turns a corner, all of the processional followers forget where they're going. So to do this, I've started using some of a diffusion model. So each time the processional leader goes, it leaves basically breadcrumbs of importance. And then the processional leaders follow this kind of gradient of diffusion, or you could even think of it as an elevation. So they're all constantly trying to go to the highest elevation as the processional leader goes through the city. So this works relatively well, actually almost too well. There's no variation in where the processional followers go. They all follow almost the exact same route as the leader, which is great. And here you can see just the results of one simulation run. That looks pretty good. But then when you do it 20 different times, they're following the exact same path. That makes it very difficult if you're trying to look at the crowd dynamics. That I doubt any type of procession crowd movement is going to be going single file down a street, especially when it's an empty street. So this kind of showed some of the difficulties that I'm dealing with, and that I think that kind of the diffusion mentality of creating kind of targets to move through along the street networks is the way to go. But then it's finding a way of how do we actually deal with finding the correct movement algorithms to do that. So the next one that I'm currently working on and is in progress, you won't see any results, but you can see kind of the idea behind it is looking at the social force model. So this means that all of the processional followers move in certain relationships to the other, their friends that they're with, the leader, and other obstacles. So they can't run into anything. They're supposed to follow the leader. They do that for the most part, but at some point they actually then go the opposite way that they're supposed to. So that's something I'm still working on and hopefully will be finished soon. Kind of a fourth model is actually going into flocking, looking at flocking movement. And this is just from previous research. I haven't had time to adapt it into the current model. But this is the idea that you have different degrees of separation, alignment, cohesion, just within a group of people. And you can see that here, all of the processional leaders or followers are following the leader for the most part. But the issue with flocking is that it's not the kind of the mathematical equation isn't created to have a designated leader. It's to determine and follow kind of all of your peers. So trying to get this into going in a directed kind of direction following a leader is difficult. But I think these are kind of the two most probable ones that will work. And it's what's being used within kind of modern urban planning. But then going back to the models I'm working on, just some of the problems that I'm running into. To begin with, just coding ability, not necessarily not being able to code it, but the amount of time, figuring out what's not working, or even it's working, but is it working like it should be? So it's figuring out what are kind of the problematics of the model. And then also accounting for movement variability. Yes, I want my followers to always follow the leader, but I want them to not not do it in a single file line. I want to account for other dynamics, even bringing in, oh, I'm tired of this procession, I'm just going to go on my way. Or you might get another person who's like, oh, what's happening there? I'm going to join in for a bit. So starting to build up changes in this. And so this accounts for also bringing in other street agents, and also trying to compare it. How can we then go back to the archaeological record? Does this make sense? Also understanding, how did movement vary in the past? What were the comfort levels? How close was I comfortable being with other people? Not unlike today, where different cultures have different kind of capacities of nearness to others. Here we might like a bit more space. When we go to Asia, you tend to get a lot closer interactions between people. So how can we study this in the past? We need to look at a lot of different variations and see what kind of makes sense to the degree to which we have any evidence. And then finally, some of the future applications. While this is a very specific model of looking at how can we study the crowd movement dynamics within a street, we can then apply these dynamics to looking at things like ritual processions through a street network, cart movement across streets, or even shopping activities of where did people go from one shop to another or to residential spaces. Even looking at traffic density along streets. Here's just another brief model I've been playing with of looking at kind of the congestion within a very central forum area of Ostia, and at what point do the pedestrians become unhappy because there's too many carts and they're running into people. So we can start to play with these dynamics and bring life back into the street networks that we see regularly at archaeological sites. But we can go further and ask about these dynamics and what that can tell us about the urban interactions within these built environments.